Welcome back to Talking Story, and welcome so much, Andrew D. Meredith, to An Artist Journey. This is one of my favorite series here on the channel where I get to talk and chart through an artist's journey that I have enjoyed their work. And I have to tell you, my friend, I enjoyed your work.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for joining me. I always like to start these at the same exact place.
Okay.
And everyone that I've ever met that has had an artist journey, kind of, you get the bug, you get bitten. So do you remember where you were in life? Do you remember when you got bitten and knew that you wanted to be a storyteller?
Yeah, I was about 12. I had read Pawn of Prophecy and Dragonlance, the first three, and then spent the next several years out in my backyard pulling my siblings around in a wagon and thinking I was in Cinderia. So that's where it started. And when you look at, well, you'll never see it, but when I look at my early stuff, it's so wildly derivative of
It's
the both of those
Dragonlance.
series and
Yeah.
and David Eddings. And so I had to spend a lot of time kind of like in the last 10 years decoupling myself from that, so that I knew when something was going to be inspired by that by choice, as opposed to just being fan fiction. So
Right.
I've definitely switched my opinions on like what even fan fiction should be, and that like I think all kids should be writing specifically fan fiction, like encouraged to write fan fiction, because if you know you're writing fan fiction, then you aren't lying to yourself later on and saying, "Oh, it's a totally original idea," and it's like you were writing fan fiction, and that's okay. I studied comic books and comic art for a while, and one of the best ways to become a comic artist is to copy other artists until you've absorbed them into your conscience, and then you're like, I'm a mix. I can easily say I'm a mix of this artist, and this artist, and my own. And that's what, I mean, Michelangelo did that. Leonardo da Vinci did that. That's what you did, was copied the masters. And I think we should encourage kids more to copy their favorite writing and just jump in. So yeah.
I couldn't agree with you more, as long as they're writing. I think so many
Right.
times, I
Exactly.
think so many times now, like I was shocked by kids coming home and it's like year after year after year. And it's like, they're not covering Shakespeare. They're not, I mean, wait a minute.
Right.
Where do we have to fill in the holes here? So, I
Right.
mean, as long as writing is happening, and I completely agree. I mean, I've had so many people, tell me finish one program or another in one art form or another. And then their journey kind of starts of getting that voice of their mentor out of their head
Right.
and finding a little bit of themselves, when to subvert, when to do something, when to pull your own tools out. But it all kind of starts from where you've learned, right? I mean, it has
Well,
to.
I mean, that's an allegory for life, right? We do that with our own parents, right?
Oh
We
God,
we
yeah.
outgrow what they've taught us to say and do in order to function, and then we either do return to that, a lot of those, but we also make modifications to that. Like, how we're raised as kids is not how we're going to raise our children, but we're also going to take things that we learned from our parents and say, nope, I'm totally taking that one and putting it in my book. And other things like, I will never do that, and then we totally do it because we realize
Oh
they
yeah,
were right.
yeah,
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 that's
yeah.
just
I mean, I'm sure you are, and probably your wife is the same way. The older you get, the more you realize your parents weren't completely.
yeah.
It's such a weird double sword, because you find out your parents weren't completely, full of it, and then as you get older, you find it's like, man, they were just making this up as they go along. We all
Oh
are. I
yeah.
mean, so it's such a weird double-edged sword.
Oh, totally.
So,
Absolutely.
other than and early on, other
Yep.
than Hickman, Eddings, these that you've mentioned
Right.
already,
Right.
do you have other early influences? And you mentioned comic books. I mean, did you have
Mhm.
comic series as young, or maybe even film, or different things that kind of like permeated you or
Yeah,
informed
I
you?
mean, I was a 90s kid, so Ninja Turtles was a big thing for me. And there's a particular race and non-human race in my other series that is just Ninja Turtles, basically. And it's Ninja Turtles meets Warhammer 40,000. And Warhammer 40,000 was a big influence in my late like high school and college. And I was starting to kind of branch out in what I was reading. I was reading a lot of 40K fiction, which there's some good stuff, there's some bad stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Well, that's
and then
everywhere. That's
right,
everywhere.
exactly. I read some Hobb, and then which was pretty influential. I think more than I realize. But I kind of had a quit year after I got married, where I stopped reading fantasy because it's not any good, right? And I was just too immature to discern, right?
Yeah.
And I quit fantasy and read a whole bunch of other stuff like Ken Follett's Pillars of the Earth, and because I was on a big monastery study kick at the time, and a little bit of horror. I'm not big on horror, but the anthology of I Am Legend was just mind blowing. And then I rediscovered fantasy through Sanderson, which opened up a whole avenue of a whole bunch of other things for me to, because I realized there was good fantasy again, and it was like it was enough for me to I just kind of needed to purge myself a bit, and then enter back in and come in with that mindset of, oh man, this is amazing. And then you have to grow past that amazement to, okay, but it has flaws too. Okay, cool, everybody's human, we can actually learn from all of this. And then so yeah, that's kind of my walk up to 2017 when I really started rewriting again. I had written a whole novel in 2010. It was absolutely garbage, like worse than garbage.
And this will never come out of the drawer. You said I'll never see it. So that
Well,
was
I
a
rewrote it.
line.
I rewrote it. The
Okay.
Collation Saga
Okay.
is the me
Okay.
tearing it down entirely, throwing everything out, and then but keeping the characters and then letting them grow from that. So it's like the seeds of those characters go all the way back to the bad derivative stuff I was writing, but then I pulled them out of the plot and wrote a whole new plot and put the same characters back in so they could live in them. Kind of as, I mean, I know you do a lot of stage work,
I
and
have. Yeah.
right. So that's how I write. I write in a theater of my mind, and I use different actors to play different parts. But even in my mind, like when I describe a bedroom in a castle, it's actually the same bedroom as I imagined Fitz's room in Robin Hobb's book, and that's what the inside of a castle room is supposed to look like. And then I just redecorate it. Like this one has furs, this one is sparse. So I reuse the same stage setting. So I'm using the same studio in my head for all of these different parts, and then I just change the angles so that as a reader doesn't know, because they're not actually seeing what I'm seeing, they're just seeing what I describe, right?
Right.
And
Well,
like
they're seeing what they see. That's what's so beautiful about
right,
literature, right? Like, yeah,
uh,
they're filling in all the holes for themselves.
exactly. I think it was Robin Hobb was talking with I'm going to draw a blank, but Aragon, author of Aragon, and they were talking. Maybe it was Brian McCullough. It doesn't matter. They were talking about how there's a couple few quintessential things that we can't change in our human mindset, and the biggest one is the river.
Mm.
We all have one river in our head, and it's the one we grew up near, and that is what a river has to look like. Like she grew up, she was all over the place. She was a Navy wife. She lived in Alaska. So when she describes the coast, it's the Alaskan coast. But when she describes rivers, she never talks about what the river looks like, because someone from Minneapolis is going to be describing the headwaters of the Mississippi, whereas I'm from Spokane, which is going to have, the falls. So it can't have not falls. And
Right.
so there's only one river in our head. And so she doesn't ever describe a river, because why try to overwrite that? Yeah,
Right. I mean,
right,
that's one of the things we're always taught. We were taught on my particular journey is never judge your audience. They're 3 steps ahead of you anyway.
right.
Right. So it's like, let them fill that in, because whatever river they grew up in. And isn't it fascinating that we fill those things up with from our formative years, which I
Yeah,
think ties into your work. And I was fascinated by one thing you said when you found Sanderson, it kind of opened you up a little bit, because one of the things that I see a similarity to your work in Sanderson as well. And I'm just kind of coming back. I've been out for a
right.
good while.
Mhm,
And I had no idea who Sanderson was, trying to
right.
catch up on the
Mhm,
Cosmere and everything. And it's not your regular medieval setting that he does. Like, he kind of subverts that in a way. It might be more Renaissance. It might be more desert dwelling. It might be more, I mean, it's a little bit different. So you have to work a touch harder to create, because it's not just default. And I found that to be true in Thrice as well. It's not just the English medieval countryside,
mhm,
um,
mhm.
and do you think you was that part of what opened you up? Because I found this, and I'm going to get back to it here in a little bit,
Yeah,
so amazingly cinematic. When you talk about filling in, I saw everything. I saw
yeah.
absolutely everything.
I that you say that, sure, that's what I meant to do. And I see what you mean, because like, Sanderson's worlds are so alien, but they're not, because they're a step. I always look at Sanderson, he's a step to the left. Everything he
Hmm.
does is a step to the left. It's fantasy, but a step to the left. And I did the same thing with Thrice, as I said, I was challenging myself to write something different than what I had been writing and what I was already pitching to agents at the time. And I said, you know what? I know European fantasy. I don't know enough about Slavic folklore, but it's just European enough
Mm-hmm.
that it will be relatable in the same way that Norse is currently really hot right now and easy, because we all know our Norse
Right.
for the most part. We all know our Greek. And so I challenged myself by making something Slavic so it would be European, but not. Because when you look at a map of Europe, all of us Americans, we're like, at default, what's our Europe? Our Europe is, aside from Scandinavia and England,
Right.
it's
Ireland,
Spain,
Wales.
France,
Yeah.
Italy, and Germany, maybe, and then past that. Well, when you actually look at the map, you're like, all that I just said is only 1/3 of all of Europe before you get into the steppes. And you're like, there's a lot more there that we can draw from, and it's still European. And so yeah, I challenged myself to do that, to set something not only in a different, but familiar enough that I could enter the nomenclature without having to do a full kind of body refresh. So
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't going to try to write something in East India and have to just spend years researching to even understand the psyche, right? So
Right.
I chose that, and then I also localized because I wanted to write a really small localized setting. So like the Peninsula of Balatar is the size of Crimea, which is also the size of Wales. So I knew you could do like Arthur, right? You could do a large story in a small zone. It's just you have a lot less travel time. And so you
Right.
can have, you cross a mountain in 3 days, not over the course of 45 days. Yeah,
Right. And travel is so inherently important here. I mean,
right.
and I will get to that as
Yeah.
well. Um, so I mean, I'm struck by Warhammer 40K. I now I have never played.
Mhm.
But I mean, you actually played or you read the books
I
or
did.
both?
Yeah, I'm a terrible player, and I'm more a painter than a modeler, more of a storyteller when I'm doing it,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and played with several friends when I grew up who could not lose, and so in overall it was kind of a disappointing experience. I'm just used to losing,
Yeah.
but 40K is a very interesting. I mean, it started the grimdark movement in its own way, and like now grimdark has kind of taken it away from 40K and made it their own thing, which is great. That's how a new subgenre grows. When you look back at 40K, it's terrible writing. Like the whole storyline is awful, but they started fixing it because they realized it was broken, and several they have a huge stable of authors who write for
Mm-hmm.
them.
Yeah. Oh, I'm
um
sure.
right, and
Well, I
so
know Dan Abnett, and I mean,
and Graham McNeil are
right.
the two, and then there's a few, I can't remember the names of like the newer ones since I've stopped reading them, that are like they're the go-tos now, and they're as good as them, if not better. And Dan Abnett and Graham McNeil were already writing good fiction in kind of a crappy setting, and then so when they wanted to start doing this big refresh with the Horus Heresy, they gave it to them first and said, it's on you guys. You
Yeah.
go, and we'll run with this thing. And they kind of did a really nuanced retcon of everything by going back 10,000 years and saying, here's what really happened. Because 10,000 years is a
Oh,
long time, right?
yeah.
And so we're going to go back 10,000 years and tell the true story, knowing what we know is a lie. How do you get to that lie from here? And we can write a great story to match up. So through that, all of their writing, including in the modern for the 40K setting, is also trying to match what's happening with this giant, now currently concluding, like they're on the last of the 50 books it took to get through over the course of 12-15 years.
Oh
There are
my
50
God.
books, not just the two of them. Like there's been lots and lots of writers, but it's this big broad 50 book series that you don't have to read in order, because that's the real cool thing about 40K is you don't have to read it all. You don't have to know anything. They've always taken the mindset of the universe is so big, nobody knows what's going on. So we're going to tell a story in this small solar system, and they have their assumptions on how the rest of the universe works, but they're wrong too. So we can just tell a story here on those bad assumptions, and you can enjoy that. So like Gaunt's Ghost is a great series, and it's basically Sharp's rifles in space,
Cool.
and every single book is the Sharps rifles, the Gaunt's ghosts, their scouts going to a new theater of war and having to adapt their ability as scouts to a new setting, which is what happens in Sharp's stories, right? Is every
Mm-hmm.
one of
Mm-hmm.
them is, now you're stuck in the city. Good luck. Oh,
Yeah.
now you're now you're out in the open. Good luck. Oh, now you're prisoners. Good luck. And so that's the whole premise of that story. And so it's like, you don't care about 40K, but you want a great space story. Gaunt's Ghosts will introduce you, but tell you nothing, and you'll have a great time at it.
Oh, what a great way to not get so enmeshed in your continuity that you can't be creative. Like
Right.
that's a great way to be able to have the freedom to
Right.
to let the authors go crazy and do what they want to do.
And the whole 40K setting is inside of 3,000 years. So you can have a story that takes place in another part of the galaxy. You just don't define the exact year. Plus, you've got spin, plus the warp, which is like hell that sits below reality, can set things off. So maybe its time is wrong as well. And so you can say, well, if the thing they do totally breaks the system, we'll just kill them off before it ever breaks the system, because that was hundreds of years ago. Who cares? So yeah, you
Yeah.
get to hit lots of hand waving. Yeah.
Wow. So I love the way I'm going to come back to that because I love the way your eyes light up when you talk about that. But on your journey now, the next phase that I always find is enormously important is mentorship. I
Yeah.
mean, some people go through a collegiate academic program, some people just get a writers group that. But we all have to have some type of mentor program that gets us over the hump, or allows us to steal enough of the best stuff that we can make it our own and move
Right.
forward. So, what important mentors were there for you on this journey? You left and then came back after a long time.
Yeah. Um, the answer was the Writing Excuses podcast, which, again, the answer is Sanderson in this case, but that's what it was. And so the Writing Excuses podcast, in 2017 we discovered it. It had been going on since 2018, so it had 15, and they had a couple short seasons. So they did 12 whole seasons of basically. Eventually, it was kind of a master's level
Mm-hmm.
set of podcasts, and I was trying to get back into writing, kind of just jump starting myself, and um, discovered that podcast as I was learning to brew beer. And so I would sit in the basement and brew beer and listen to all 12 seasons over 1 year, just as a giant crash course. And because I had already decided, having listened to like first season, I need to tear this whole book down. So I kind of spent that in kind of a cocoon phase of tearing things down and still doing world building, but not writing. And the punchline for the whole podcast is, at the very end, it says, "You're out of excuses, now go write." But I always
Right.
had an excuse. I had the next episode. So I would
Oh.
listen to the next episode. They're only 15 minutes long. And so you get things, you re-listen to some things. I haven't listened to it in a few years now, for the simple fact that they're more than 12 seasons deep. They're just repeating themselves now because they have
Mhm.
new people, and nobody goes back and listens to the old episodes. So they want to refresh that. So it has not been necessary for me anymore. But once I ran out of those books or those podcasts, I was out of excuses. So I had to go write. And that was at the exact same time as had a big changing of the guards in our family, as our grandfather was dying. So I was like, I
Mhm.
needed something to heal, and so I wrote and wrote a
Mhm.
lot. I wrote 175,000 words in 2 months on my first like stint. I had spent 6 months kind of
Wow.
learning myself and writing a bunch of short stories, but then I was like, I'm ready to go. It's Easter. I don't want to go hang out with friends. I'm going to start writing. And then 6 weeks later, I had 175,000 words, and I've never replicated that before since then. But I
I
learned so
have to.
much that year.
Yeah, I have to think you're losing your grandfather was such a catharsis for that. I
Yeah,
mean, that had to be a trigger, right?
it
Like,
was
what was the relationship like there? Was he a storyteller as well? Was there something that you
very
were paying
much.
homage to him by doing
Yeah,
this, by giving back?
he was an absolute bard. He was life of every party. If you were on stage and he came to the show, it was going to be the best show you ever had, because he was in the back guffawing as loud as he could. Big
Ah,
belly man.
oh,
He
he
survived
was the
polio.
best.
He
He was
was.
the best. Yeah.
Yeah, he survived polio, and so he had nothing below. He just had twigs below his hips, and he went into prosthetics. So he built prosthetics for wounded warriors, for people who were born without anything. He built it by hand. So it was before computer; it was all machined, and he and his crew would make it. So that's what he did for a living, was make prosthetics for others, and he was just the best man. And so he was somebody who was always an inspiration as a disability. Nope, that doesn't get him down. So you move on, and it's like you and he's still life of the party, sitting in his big chair around the party. And so that was his inspiration, and you see more of him in the Collation Saga, which is a story of changing of guard and legacy being passed from one generation to the other. So that definitely came out in that. But that's what I was writing, was the Collation Saga. For that catharsis. Yeah.
I mean, there's no better way to pay homage, right? I mean, here's someone that changed the world they lived in by making people's lives better in that way, by giving them limbs.
Right.
And no better way to pay homage to him than actually go on a binge of creating worlds of your own.
Yeah.
Wow. That's pretty special, Andrew.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So other than when you were talking about mentors, if I can go back for a second, you said we discovered.
My wife and I.
Your wife, okay.
Now, so I started. So she's a writer too. She has the degree. When
you say degree, MFA?
No, like a degree in an English degree, and for writing, because she wanted to be a writer. And here I am writing a book, and she's like, "That's not fair. I'm the one with the degree. I should be the one writing." So she writes mysteries. She writes historical mysteries because she likes the research and I like the world building. So we'll always joke that she always jokes that, well, you do fantasy because you don't have to do any research. And I was like, I'm on Wikipedia all day long. It's and because you use Wikipedia not as a source but as a stepping off point for inspiration. And so. And she also had the background of, when we were in Minnesota, we worked for Fantasy Flight Games, and she launched their novel department. Got to work with Graham McNeil and Dan Abnett's wife and several other authors as they were writing in-game fiction for the games for Fantasy Flight. So we had that background and had both written books. She had an agent, and then COVID hit. And we had been looking at the idea of maybe going indie for a while, but it was like, we don't have the time. It's so much work. We knew what kind of work it was going to be. That's why we were trying to find the agents and publishers, because it's a lot of work. Well, then the world shut down and we're like, well, we got time now.
What else are you going to do?
Yeah, right. So we spent a whole year and a half prepping, and then we launched both of our books in 2021. She let her agent go, and we were ready to move on. And so we kind of tried to blow up on the scene. It didn't happen. It still took time, and then kind of slow burned through 2022. So we're kind of each other's mentors in that sense, because she writes mystery and I write fantasy, and sometimes they start crossing streams a little bit. But because of that, we're able to be a much better sounding board for each other. I mean, as we both read mystery and fantasy, so it's not like she reads mystery only and has never read a fantasy, so she's not inserting a new thing. She's inserting an outside point of view that is inside point of view, because we're just brainstorming all the time.
Yeah. So it's a real family business, right?
Yeah, very.
I mean, you guys, I can imagine you're probably working together quite a bit.
Yeah, and then I'll produce or record her audiobooks and then do my own audiobooks too. But I'll record and master hers. Yeah.
And there's a bit of a whodunit in this that we'll get back to as well. So you know what? And I have to. I mean, if you'll indulge me for a second, this parallels my journey so much. My wife and I met starting a theater company. Yeah, and she was the academic, and I was the I'm just gonna do it. Just get up there and And so it's like it's kind of a mirror, right? I mean, and we've worked together ever since, kind of meeting, doing it, that kind of thing, and it has been enormously fulfilling, and I'm sure you guys feel the same way, right? I mean, there wouldn't be one without the other.
No, and it's like with any good marriage, there's ups and downs, and chances are when one of us is down, the other one's up, and vice versa, which always makes up for all slack. And same thing happens in the writing. We can have just a terrible month for one of us in sales, and the other one's doing well, and that keeps us going.
Keeps you going,
yeah, exactly. Write another book. Go write another book, and taking care of each other. But we also write on opposites, which also helps. I write at 5 a.m. and she only writes in the evenings or during the day. So I'm up in the morning and I'm writing before this house is even awake. I'm good to go. And if she's like, I've got to write today, it's like, okay, kids,
You're with me. Yeah.
go. And and she's the introvert too. So I can get them out of the house and go do something fun. And she can then have 8 hours and just pump words out. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So the podcast, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And I would imagine your wife,
Yeah.
Patricia
Yeah. Patricia. Yep.
is would be some of your biggest mentors at this point. I mean, would you
Yeah.
say that kind of tracks your journey as far as
Yeah. And it's hard as you get later in life to find mentors.
yeah,
And so sometimes you have to be a mentor until somebody shows up. And that's kind of what I've kind of fallen into in the community is and I hate trying to like say, oh, I'm a mentor. I said, no, I'm not. I'm just an encourager, which
right.
in my opinion is totally different.
Well,
But
but I
you do what you
found
can.
that such a beautiful thing in this
Yeah.
community is that it's like that rising tide raises all boats mentality.
100%.
Like
Yeah.
it was such a breath of fresh air for me coming from a different artistic path because it's not always like that, you know,
No.
at
It's not always
all.
like that in the publishing industry too. Like there's whole segments of some of the segments, we won't have to name who they are, and they're not in our group but in other genres, we'll just say that doesn't say everything, is very vitriolic and
Yeah,
very cutthroat and very you're stepping on my toes, get out of my way. And it's like, and we're over here like, hey man,
yeah,
dude, it's good. We're
yeah,
just gonna
yeah.
make more pie. That's all it is. Is like,
Yeah,
readers want pie. There's no
there's
competition.
more
Just make them
pie.
more pie,
More
man.
there's just more slices to go around.
Exactly.
So the mentor journey for you, I would think now is somewhat shifted now with you being so active in the indie community
Yeah.
is more like a peer group as opposed to mentor group. Would that be
Very.
something safe to say?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And that is the strength and the weakness of all writing community, indie or not, is we're very hard to find until we find them. And maybe it's the algorithm, maybe it's just how it works. If you're not online at all, you only have your local place and you want to get together in a writing group, you're going to have people who don't write what you write at all, and they're not
Mhm.
interested in what you write, and they have different mindsets of whether they want to go to publishing or whether it's a hobby. The indie community online has allowed all of us to find each other who are in the same slot of life, and so we can actually link arms and run. As
Mhm.
I am 5 books deep and I'm looking for others who have had a couple books under their belt, and I can give advice to those who are just getting started. But what I need is to lock arms with somebody who's running the same race I'm running right now, and
Right.
so that we can encourage each other and be on each other's shoulders when something goes wrong. And because we're in a very different part of our life, which
Sure.
again, that's an analogy for all of life, right?
Absolutely.
It's not just
Yeah.
your age but where you are on the path.
Right. You're at a different spot of the race. Yeah.
Right.
So um as you said, it didn't take off like a rocket. It
No.
takes, it takes consistency and steady work and perseverance. And who are, if you wouldn't mind mentioning, who are some of those peers now that you feel like you're kind of moving with?
The easy one's Tori Tekken. We kind of
Yeah.
found each other a year ago accidentally, and now she's good friends with me and my wife. We went out and visited her over the summer as we were driving out to the East Coast. So we're like, we all talk every day. Thiago Abdallah and I locked arms last year during SBFBO. He wrote
Hmm.
Touch of Light and Shade of
I
Madness, and we locked
I have
arms.
not read him yet. Tori, I've read, and Tori was the one that said you have to read Andrew Meredith.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
that's yeah,
yeah. And I actually just finished recording her audiobook too. Um,
yeah.
that's
How
almost
did you
done.
get into that? Or I'll come back to that.
Yeah,
We'll
yeah,
stay on track.
yeah.
I don't want to do too many tangents, but
Yeah, Chiago, and then I just made buddies with ZS Diamante,
I do
and
have his book.
he's
Yeah.
yep, he's really big on TikTok, and now he's sliding sideways over into Twitter and Instagram. Instagram is kind of his, like, just for fun, like where you can actually socialize, versus
Mhm.
TikTok is very much business. And man, he
Mm,
runs a tight ship. Man, he runs a
really?
business. Um,
So
so I've just met him, and
awareness
he's local. he's local to me, so we
Oh,
can
that's
actually hang out.
great.
So that's really
That's
cool.
great. Yeah.
So we'll see where that goes. But that's like new in the last just a couple weeks. But it's like meeting another local author who's having modes of success that we can actually just encourage each other, and that's just so important.
Oh, you
Yeah.
have to have it, man. You
Yeah.
gotta have it. I mean, I've found that. So, now you've mentioned that Patricia had an agent and went I think I heard you say you tried to send some things out or do
Mhm.
different things with.
Mhm.
What was that journey like when you decided it's an indie path for me? Like, this
Right.
is just this is the path that makes sense for me.
Uh, was feeling pretty discouraged. Um, Seeking out an agent. As I look back in hindsight, I haven't quite decided if it's sour grapes or not yet. But like
Mm,
when I look at like Thrice, I was pitching it at the same moment that The Witcher was coming out, and I hadn't even heard of The Witcher yet. So agents, in my opinion, probably were like, this it's too late. Sorry. If you had caught me a year ago, we could have made something of this. And so they don't ever tell you that. You don't That's the issue with that industry, which can't be fixed because they're getting hundreds of books every day. Is that they're not
yeah,
going to give you feedback and say, this isn't going to work because there's a thing called The Witcher coming out. I'm sorry, it's too late. We can't get this published in the next 6 months. That's not possible.
right.
Um, so 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 it was discouraging that I wasn't finding an agent. But like as we were starting to really eye indie, that was when The Mandalorian came out.
Mm,
Watched the first season of Mandalorian, and we're like, oh man, this is a comp. When is
mhm.
season two coming out? Or when is Witcher 2 coming out? And I basically tried to make sure I could get Thrice out. It didn't end up doing anything marketing wise, but it did get this light a fire under me to make sure I had Thrice out before Witcher season 2 came out so I could comp it on online for selling and say, if you're a fan of The Witcher and Mandalorian, this book's for you. Because I
Yeah.
kept always pitching it as, well, this is a lone wolf and cub narrative, and I'll still say it to somebody who I can
And
figure knows what they're talking about, but
that's the first
most
thing
people
I
don't know
said.
what that is.
Yeah,
Crazy.
and I don't know how, like, that's insane to me,
I
but
know.
it's like, yeah, but it is. I mean,
Right.
it harkens back to that. But I
Mhm.
mean, you could compare it to any genre. You could it's a
Absolutely. Road to
true grit.
Perdition,
It's
which
a
is
road to
also Lone
perdition.
Wolf.
It's a
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. I mean,
The Wolf,
but it's
Logan. Yeah.
the same. It's
Mhm.
so timeless and
Right.
so classic,
Right. Yep.
that it'll never go out of fashion. But it's
No.
interesting. I have heard the same thing. Agents have a certain amount of slots,
Right. Yep.
and those slots go to certain types of things. And when they get filled up, it's
And on top of which they have to be thinking out 3 years ahead.
right because it
So
takes
they
that
can't
long.
and Hollywood's very, very fast, right? Like The Witcher was announced in June and it came out in November and they were filming it in June. So that's a fast turnaround. Like the
Yeah.
Hollywood because they have a lot of money they can throw at that sort of thing. Publishing's not like that. So it isn't like we can say, well, in 3 years, it's all hope. It's all I think there could be something like this in 3 years, and so they shotgun, and the one book that happens to match the one thing because it's part of the collective mind that's come through
Hmm.
and created
Hmm.
something 3 years from now, the book matches up and it blows up because it's just like it.
Hmm.
You can't know that. We can't know
No.
that. um but now we're starting to see with indie that even tradpub is looking at indie as the bellwethers for what's coming because they can start to see it. Like great example is Legends and Lattes, right?
Hmm.
Who knew that
Who knew cozy
cozy?
fantasy was a
Right.
thing?
When you
That was
look
the
back,
yeah,
you can look at the causality and go, of course that's what happened.
yeah.
Because like when you look at I've been kind of analyzing like what's happened since COVID for indie writers, especially. And the first group of writers that wrote out of COVID were were cathartic writers. They were writing really dark stuff and it was all catharsis. And then right after that is the cozy writers who were
It's
like,
got to swing the other way.
I'm actually an introvert and I loved this. So I'm going to
Yeah.
write a really nice thing about staying at home. And
Yeah,
you're
my
like,
blanket was great.
yeah, give me the Shire, man. And so we can look backwards now 2 years later and go, of course cozy happened, but you can't expect it to happen um beforehand. So you just kind of make a guess. And of course, Travis Baldree was the perfect storm. And so of course publishing snatched him up,
Mhm.
and great for him. He hit a perfect moment, and he gets the winning lottery ticket from that.
Right.
And it is a lottery ticket. Sanderson will say that too. He won the lottery not because of what his writing, but because he was tapped to finish Wheel of Time.
Yeah. Yeah. But I said that for so many years when I was living in LA. It's like I met so many people that were like, wow, that's some of the best work I've ever seen, but their numbers don't come up.
Right.
If they keep playing, maybe their numbers will come up.
Right.
But it's, you know,
Right. You can have an actor who's just, why hasn't this actor become
yeah.
the actor and took the
It's
right role? I mean, look at like, especially if you look before and after, but you look at like Viggo Mortensen, right? Fantastic actor.
mm-hmm.
And the stuff that he did before Lord of the Rings, stuff he did after, is reflective of who he actually is as an actor. He's usually using very indie, like Captain Fantastic, that sort of thing. And so that's more evocative of who he is, but people went to his movies because he was Aragorn.
Yeah.
And yeah, he won. That's a great ticket to get.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone's looking for that ticket. So how long did you give yourself, Andrew, before you kind of felt, maybe I'm getting discouraged for my own sanity, for my own sake. I mean, I need to make a shift here. How
Yeah.
long did you give yourself?
Probably shorter than it ought to have been. But I had been to some conventions to pitch to agents 3 months before COVID.
Yeah.
COVID happened. My wife has this agent who I never felt was looking out for her best interests, and we're just kind of waiting and seeing what's happened. And of course, the whole industry kind of had a collapse, which you look back at the whole industry, they've had collapses before. It happened right after 9/11, happened
Mhm.
10 years before that. And so there was a collapse where everybody was leaving New York, in the publishing industry was firing everybody. So you couldn't sell any books. And so that was a perfect storm of, this is discouraging for her.
Mhm.
And so once we were both online to go, let's just go indie, we just need to do this, then we could do that. But it took a whole nother year past that. So really it was more like an 18-month from
Mm.
January 2020 till we published in summer and autumn of 2021. So it's probably about 18-month journey
Mm.
into the indie sphere. And then it's like parenthood. You can never be ready, no matter how much you prep.
No,
And so
I
we walked in, and then it was still another year before my next book came out, even though it was ready, because I needed to learn what we needed to learn from the first book to apply it to the next book, and still
sure.
made massive mistakes with that too. And
Yeah.
then finally kind of got our footing probably at the end of 2022. And so like 2023 has been the next big stage in our journey. Yeah.
It's there's so much to learn. I mean, beyond just
Absolutely.
the art,
Mhm.
right? Because you've got to market, you've got to.
Yep.
I mean, shipping, receiving. I mean,
Right.
every stage of the business is a one man, or in your case, a family band.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and so much to learn.
And it's also, so I don't know if you've ever looked at like the 5-year journey, which you can equate to being like your high school and your first year out. So
Hmm.
it's your freshman, your sophomore, your junior, your senior, and your do
And
it
you're,
year,
yeah,
right? Your execution year. And we had a 5-year journey as writers, and now we're on probably would be like our 3rd year journey as authors now.
hmm,
So we're seeing what we've learned and how much farther we have to go to get to that next stage, um in our journey, in our hero's journey, really.
yeah.
um and not just hero's journey. Have you ever looked at KM Weiland? um
No.
this book, she's a podcaster. She has 17 years of podcasting now. And this is kind of her dissertation of 17 years, where she put everything together, where she was putting together like the hero's journey and the heroine's journey, and there's 6 stages of life. And when we were listening to that podcast as it came out live before she compiled it into the book, it changed our mindset on not only how we write our characters, but how we're living our own lives. Because we were
Oh,
realize we
fascinating.
could identify where we were at in our
Right.
life cycle as
Right.
authors, that we're past the heroine's journey, now we're in the queen's journey, and the queen's journey is all about kind of letting your kids leave the nest. And that includes
Sure.
people, not your actual kids in our case, but like, who are we
Your creative
encouraging to
kids.
stop?
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And so where are we at with that? But then that means, means we're heading towards a king's arc. So when do I have to sacrifice myself for the kingdom, and it's just fun to, it's like personality tests to figure out where you're at and where you're going. But it's also makes you start realizing, wait, do I have a coward and a bully in my life I need to get rid of, or I'm going to start emulating them? And so
Mm.
you're watching who's in your story, and yeah,
Wow. Oh, that's pretty fascinating, man. That's really
yeah.
fascinating. Well, I mean, I'm hoping that the answer is affirmative here, that your trend is after 3 years going up on this
It seems
journey
so. Yeah,
for
year over
both of
year, it
you.
seems so. Yeah, and every year's a gambit, but we
Yeah.
continue to move forward, onward and upward. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let me, and
The big shift I saw was over Black Friday this year, because I've had
really,
books for sale before, and usually I'll put all of our books on sale for 99 cents, and we'll get a
I
big
saw, yeah.
boost. Yeah, we'll
Hmm.
get 20, 30 people be like, "Oh yeah, I guess I'll buy your book." Like, "Oh, thanks, man. That's so nice of you." And
Right.
not this year. We put everything on sale for 99 cents, and it doesn't equate to anything money financially, but when suddenly 400 people have bought your book, and you're like, this is more than I've had
That's
in a year and a half.
huge,
This is nuts. And then they did it
but
again in
that's
December, and it's like,
huge.
right. So what it felt like to me was, I finally felt like, one, we have 10 books now between the two of us, that it felt like people were like, of course I'm going to buy your books. Stupid not
Yeah.
to spend the $10 to buy 10 books, because I know who you are now. So it feels like you're when you hit that point where you're finally you feel like you're noticed as a known entity. Doesn't matter whether you're famous or not, but you're just a known entity, is an encouraging step forward. So
Well,
yeah.
I would think that's really huge. And in your case, as the story goes on and you get people on board, those 400 people are
Right.
going to want the next.
Right.
But
Right.
I just
Exactly.
want to segue, and I know this is not going to be news to you at all, but for those people out there that have not enjoyed Thrice, now I just want to have a little bit of this, put a little bit of this out there for you. And for me, Andrew, this is just a perfect little hit parade of the cinematic feel of this book. When I say I saw everything, and that generally for me, I'm a very visual reader anyway,
Yep.
but this in particular, when I first started describing, on my weekly catch up, it's just like it's a lone wolf and cub narrative,
Mhm.
and if you've ever seen the flick Eastern Promises with Viggo Mortensen, picture Viggo Mortensen and that,
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
a lone wolf and governor, and it's
Yeah.
just so cinematic. But I mean, let me just put a little bit of this out there because I just think this is, first of all, beautiful
Thank you.
and will illustrate the point of what I mean by cinematic. The wind had died, leaving the landscape a black parchment of windblown white snow. The only scribblings of a heavenly scribe were the dead grass that poked up out of the canvas, while the few bushes illuminated the border of the page with a story none could read. Come on, man, that is good shit. Like when you put the period on that, did you just kind of sit back and go, yeah, that's all right. That one's all right.
That's my second favorite line that I've written.
I mean, I went back and read that a couple times, my
Yeah.
friend. I mean, it's so evocative. It's so beautiful.
Thank you.
It elicits an emotional response as well as a visual response. It's completely what you want tonally in that part of the book.
Yeah.
It's operating on so many different levels that one line just sinks you exactly where you want a reader to be.
I probably had a lot of coffee that day. I don't know what happened that on that day in particular. And it's not like I'm not overly prosy, but also I don't mind dropping prose.
Yeah.
And that, yeah, that was one of those, when I first wrote that, um of course it stayed.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
will completely agree with you. You are not overly prosy because it's not a dense book. I didn't feel like I'm
Right.
going to no, wait a minute, what happened? And I have to go back or wade through something to actually get a picture. It just flows. It flows like True Grit. It flows like it's a folk tale. It's a parable. It's something that we can all grasp hold of. And your prose does not get in the way of that. That's why when you have a pearl like that, it works so well because it's not overdone.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I just want to get your thoughts on that. And I want to
Yeah.
illustrate, if anyone hasn't read this, there's some absolutely beautiful language along with this amazing cinematic journey. And the other thing I want to bring up that really absolutely struck me in this work, and I don't know how hard you worked at this, because I have been completely guilty of someone after a show saying, "Oh, when you did and you decided to do," and it's like, not a clue. But yeah, great,
Yeah.
good for you,
Yeah.
and you smile and nod,
But yeah. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
I had an itch and I was scratching. It had nothing to do with the fact that I was playing a madman. No.
yeah. But there is a, and I know you're well learned enough in the form to understand the Aristotelian arc and the circular nature of that.
Mhm,
But there are circles within circles going on in this narrative.
mhm,
And it's that circular function of it, in such as, um, and I don't want to give too much away, obviously, for spoilers,
yeah,
but the lore of the world of when fate is broken into two halves
mhm,
starts to become circled upon and mirrored in what's happening in these characters' lives in the moment, right?
yeah,
That trip that they have to take when they decide, when Papa Jove decides, we're not going to run, we're going to go right into the lion's den or the bear's cave in this
yeah.
case. And then, to borrow the subtitle of Hobbit, it's there and back again. It's a circle back through. And we, so it's this circular nature of this narrative. Was that structured purposefully, or was that just a happenstance?
I don't recall, but very likely. I'm a very heavy outliner. I no, let me rephrase that. I'm not a heavy outliner, but I am an outliner. I set myself with a loose outline of bullet points, and every bullet points is about 1,000 words, so that I can see the arc of the entire story. Um, but I also, I mean, it worked for me, and it probably, if anything, is very subconscious because I'm doing the same thing again with my other series. As I'm and even the sequel, Fourscored, has that circular
Mm,
and ends close to where it starts. And no, it does end where it starts. And so there's a lot of introspection in the story itself, as the story is not just looping back on itself, because it's not closing a loop where it's ending up in the exact same spot, right? Like,
mm-mm.
it's the same with Lord of the Rings. Like, there's going to be a change. You're arriving at the new spot with a change of who you are, or in the case of Joven's case, he's arriving back at the same spot with new information than he had before, that allows him to then inform his next decision at the end of the book.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And thematically, it works so well with. I mean, I was just struck by. I think if they would have paid more attention to, or catalog their world more through the eyes of this very special child,
mhm,
they might have paid more attention to these people on the way out.
right,
So they might have they might have been able to
right,
gather more than waiting for the all the way back, which I thought was very. And again, I don't want to give too much away, but this is a very special child, and there,
yep,
some of the shoes drop, and some of the reasons we do come to light.
mhm,
Um, I was just, it absolutely worked for me. I
yep,
absolutely loved the circular nature of it, and I appreciated it so much.
thank you.
Um, because it's that you fall into the same trap as a reader. You fall
Mhm,
into a comfort level as a reader that, oh, I know this story. It's a folk tale. It's a parable. I know. And then by the time you start coming back and you see all the things you missed as a reader on the first trip out, then everything, the enlightenment hits even harder. I believe.
right. Well, because like we all need that growth coming back to our own hometown, of coming back
Mm-hmm.
and realizing some things that we assumed were true. That neighborhood's not the one you go to, but there's other neighborhoods that you're like, actually, why does this part of town hate the other part of town? Oh, it's because they're jealous. I wouldn't mind living up here. That wouldn't be too bad. But
Mm-hmm.
my young self had to grow up to realize the reality of what I was seeing from an outsider's point of view, from more so than somebody who stays there and never leaves town will never see that.
Mm-hmm.
But they'll see the change in the person who comes back to town.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
there's so much duality in that that the person who stays and the person who goes are seeing two different people.
Sure. And
Yeah.
and when they come back, they're different people from
Right.
when they left.
Mhm.
And the fascinating thing, because you do bring this up, and I found that another very important theme of the book is social strata and where people factor in,
Mhm.
um, as they're being met, as they come. There's a lot of secrets being held,
Mhm.
and there's not a lot of trust to divulge them, and a lot of that comes from not being on the same social path as the other.
Yes.
Sometimes characters are talking around each other as opposed to talking to each other until we get
Yes.
closer to the end.
Yes. Uh, that's a theme in a lot of my writing is I say I write characters who are in the marginalia because I like
Mhm.
not so much to focus on writing the story of the hero as writing it from Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, but without Hamlet, right? And
Right.
and that's who Jovan is, right? Is he's on the marginalia, but he's the only one willing to make any decisions of all these idiots who are just doing this with each other. And so seeing all of these big things occur or not occur because they're off stage while he does his thing, lets me focus in on the threat that's actually happening.
Right.
And I have more fun with that too, because then I don't have to describe the big battle on the outside of the wall.
Sure.
I can just describe Jean Valjean talking to the kid, right?
The kid,
Yeah, with
but
Marius.
it makes it so intimate. It
Hmm.
makes it
Yeah,
so unbelievably, um, uh, you can touch
relatable.
it. You relatable.
Yeah,
You can touch it.
yeah,
You can grab it. It's intimate.
right.
I've been there, and these conflicts are going on because of traditions and expectations of social strata or different things, or
Yeah,
it, I was just really struck by, oh man, there's some thematic work going here in that level of where we are socially and what's expected of that,
yeah.
and the subversion of that, that I absolutely appreciated.
I don't often plan my themes, but I identify them in post, and so that I
Hmm.
can kind of double down on them. So I'm someone like Thiago Abdallah. He's a theme heavy writer. He starts with a theme, and everything's got to feed the theme. And I will get to the end of a book. I'll remap my own book and realize where I'm missing tension. Kind of see the whole picture from the top down, and realize, oh, there's a big theme here, and it doesn't even really show up until book two, but we are heading that way. Or
Right.
you get to your writing book two, and you're like, oh man, I set this up a long time ago. Who knew?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then you got to make it. We got to pay it off. But
Sure.
um,
Or that, I mean, they say writing is rewriting. So when you're doing that $30,000, 30,000 feet top
right,
down view, right? You can start, oh, I better start leaving some breadcrumbs because this
yeah,
seems to be important. That
yeah,
type of feel. Yeah.
and get a few chuckles out of myself when I realize I wrote something really great.
Isn't that, I mean, if you outline in bullet points like that as you describe, is that so you give yourself the freedom to just let a flow happen? Just
Yeah. I that took a couple years to kind of develop. So when I first started, like back during that year when I was learning to write and
mhm,
really relearning how to write, part of it was some of the advice from the podcast was learning to know yourself, learning how you
mhm,
work. Like
mhm.
Dan Wells does the one thing nobody should do, and that's that he moves forward very slowly because he goes back and reads everything he's written, and so he makes it in this
Oh
sweeping
gosh.
method. And they say
Yeah.
you really shouldn't do that, especially as a new author, as a
Yeah.
new
You should
writer,
just keep going
because
forward.
right,
Yeah.
because then you end up like Patrick Rothfuss, who wrote the first book 12 times over before he finally got it published. And it's
Right.
like because he was this perfectionist, it's like
Right.
you can't
But
edit
now
a
you
blank
don't have time to
page.
do that. Now you have
Exactly.
everyone waiting for yeah.
Right.
And I think he fell into that trap when he didn't have time to do that. Book 2, he wasn't as happy with it, and now he's
No.
completely paralyzed.
Correct, because failed in book 2 for the fact that he rushed it because the publisher said, "Give us a book," and he still did. It still
Mhm.
took 5 years, but he
Right.
rushed it, and now I guarantee you he is crippled with the
Mhm.
fear because he knows he did it right the first time, so he needs to do that again.
Yeah.
But now it's not being done. So in part of knowing myself, I started to realize that I liked, but thrice aside, I like the 3,500 word chapter, and I kind
Mhm.
of get really. I love my word count. 3,500 words. A long chapter's 5,000 words. So when I wrote Thrice, so okay, so I got to that, and so I knew that okay, a chapter, I like 3,500 words. That's going to be 3 beats, 3 bullet points here, and so then I
Oh.
can write this bullet point. So and so goes into the inn and gets into a fight with X. That's a bullet point. That's 1,000 words. I can do it in 1,000, maybe 15. We're good. Move on. Okay, so then I know that over the course of this arc of 3 plot points,
Mm-hmm.
here's the 3 things that happen. That's chapter. Okay, we're good. Next chapter. So then when I wrote Thrice, I forced myself to write a faster book. So I wrote 2,500 word chapters. So it's still 3 bullets, but they're approximately 900 words per chapter. So a little bit shorter. Let's short up so that I could have more of almost Dresden Files. Every
Mm-hmm.
chapter is going to be done, and every 2 chapters is kind of together an episode, and then we'll move on to the next episode, and then I could write 2 chapters a day, maybe 1 chapter a day, and feel like I had finished off and could move on to the next. So all that to say, once I knew that I write 1,000-word bullets, I
Mm-hmm.
could plan the whole thing out. My big knock that I had to learn was to not plan any of my conversations. So I keep a
Oh.
running list of conversations I want to have, like especially when I'm waxing philosophical, is
Sure.
this has to happen. But what I found is I would say at 3/4, in chapter 25, Jova's going to have this discussion about this thing with Slant, and then I would get to that chapter, and I already had the conversation 10 chapters ago, and I have this blank bullet point, but I still had to be in this place to get to the end of the book. And so what do? And so I ended up with gaps. And so I stopped. I no longer plan out any of my convos. Those I just keep a running tally of ones I want to happen so that when they occur, it's much more natural. It lets me put in what I call moments of normalcy, which I'm going to draw a blank on the word, but I just discovered there's a word for it that Miyazaki uses. It's a Japanese term
Director.
for
Mm.
the emptiness of nothing happening. So it's like
Mm.
that moment in like a Bluey episode or a Miyazaki film where it's just grass on the hills and it goes on for like 30 seconds and you're like, oh, you just take a
Yeah.
relaxation. So I write those into my books by having a moment around the campfire. Nothing happens. It's Seinfeld at that point. Nothing happens because I want you to take a moment to go, everything's okay for now,
Right.
but tomorrow it'll be bad. But
But
right now,
that's
that's what that scene was, right? It was just windswept snow,
right.
and they're dying because they're freezing,
Right.
and things are
But
going to get bad the next episode.
there were moments where we had a scene like that,
Yeah,
right, around the campfire, nothing, but everything's happening because when you come back through and you meet these people again,
right.
you know, like it's in those quiet moments where the good stuff happens.
Yeah,
And I'm fascinated, and I have to get into this. I have to, and if you'll indulge me,
yeah.
it's and this is from my background. But you say things like, "I don't plan a conversation out," and you work in beats,
Mhm.
and you want the conversation to be natural. So this sounds to me like a lot of theater training. Is there any theater training in your background? I know you do audiobooks, and
Yeah.
maybe you came to that through that type of training, because it sounds to me like you don't overplan your conversations, so you can just drive a motivation from the character
Right.
without going in of what they're going to say. That way the characters can speak for themselves.
Yeah, I do often equate it to theater. So I did theater in high school and college just a little bit, and then life happened. So I haven't done a whole lot since then.
Yeah.
But I was raised like my mom took me to Grandhouse Hamlet at age I would have been like 12, I think, when it came out. And when we went to go see it, um, she spoiled the whole show for me ahead of time so that I would have the nomenclature to walk into the story.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so thankful. And I will do the same thing with my kids. Here's the story. In the end, they all die. You need to
Yeah.
know this. It's
Yeah.
all heading towards this so that you're not going to be shocked and it's still going to be shocking because you're going to go through this emotional journey, but you're not going to be shocked and be torn out because it takes, a full act before your brain switches into Shakespearean and you start laughing. Like
Right.
Romeo plus Juliet, by the end of the gas station scene, I'm laughing at the jokes. Okay, now I'm in because it has
Mm-hmm.
done its job to put me into the mindset. So I no doubt do the same in my writing too, where I'm kind of training you into what I'm doing. Trust me, we're gonna go. It's gonna be a slow journey. Promise things will happen along the way, but just trust that this is gonna be a good journey because I'm here to tell a campfire story over the course of this book, right?
Yeah.
So I do have a lot of that theater background, which is why I got into audiobooks because I like doing voices. I've always read to my wife out in voices, and so like it was easy for me to do audiobooks with every voice imaginable because I love doing that. So, but because I'm writing in a style that's also with that theater background, I'm also, setting a lot of the same kind of tones that theater can do. And the beauty of live theater is that your actors can do things that are off script.
Yes.
They still got to follow the script. And so like I've had very few things that have happened in my script that have been a rewrite from the characters. There's a love interest that occurred in book 2 of the Collation Saga that grew out of that into I had to change everything for 3 and 4 because I had to make room for her. And I have another character who shows up in the first book. He was just going to be a bit piece who would kind of show up as a side tertiary character, and he has very kindly asked me to be part of the series from now on. So starting in book 4 and then going into 5 and 6, he is going to get his own plot because he's a good employee and
Yeah. He
and I
demands
like
it.
what he's doing. I like
He
what he's
demands
working.
it.
So
But
he gets it.
isn't it amazing? Yeah, it's like, but if the motivation is strong, if they go into that scene with a strong motivation and they're going to drive it,
Mhm.
drive to get it, like
Right.
that's what makes us watch, man. Like
Right.
I mean, yeah, I mean,
Those are the characters that
I
run away with it, and a lot of
absolutely,
authors will cut them because they ran away with the script, and it's like, "No, no, no, just a minute. We're dealing with multiple characters who have all been suffering who are all suffering from this massive trauma that occurs at the end of book 2, and they all have each of their own ways that they're going to react to it afterwards. Like, what do they do going out of this? I'm going to go into drink. I'm going to run away from it. I'm going to face it head on." And this other character said, "But I want to do this because of the trauma, and it's something nobody else is doing." And I'm like, I like I like the cut of your jib, sir.
yeah,
So
yeah,
he gets to do it, and he gets to do this other thing that nobody else is doing, and I'm going to reward him for it too. Whether that means the rewarding is I kick into the dirt a few times to learn some more lessons. Out of that, will hopefully I'll get an opportunity to reward his character, and he becomes somebody that people love, or it's just for me. Who knows?
yeah, yeah.
So
Well, you got to write for you, right? And you got to
right,
kill your darlings. Like
exactly.
that's the old
Yep.
axiom. You got to do it.
Yep.
Um, Let me just touch on it before I completely run out of time here and lose you. But let me touch on the theme of fatherhood because it is
Yep.
so ingrained in this
Yeah.
work, and
Yep.
it was so important to me having raised my own son, and
Yeah.
and now to be working with him on the channel and
Yeah.
everything. Um, what an amazing journey, And I think you capture so much of that I would have never known about fatherhood had I not been a father.
Mhm.
That the act of raising another person informs who you are.
It does.
I could not be the man or the person I am without having all that time spent with that with that other person.
Yeah.
And that was the theme is just on every page. I just think Papa Jove is or Joven is just he's realizing this on every page.
Yeah. Yeah. My son was 4 years old when I wrote that. So
Oh my
that's
God.
so that's why.
Yeah.
I it's kind of funny after I published it, I had a few early reviews were like, "This isn't how little kids talk." And I'm like, "Then you've never been around a child
You've never
before.
been
I'm
around little
sorry.
kids.
This is
Yeah.
what 4-year-olds do.
Hmm.
They not only say what they're thinking, they say what isn't being spoken, and they their philosophy goes deep, and you're like, "I don't know how to answer that."
You can't even start.
No. And
Yeah.
so I had to write that. So when I said
Yeah.
I wanted to write a Slavic lone wolf and cub story and write it, and I wrote it in like 3 months because I was NaNoWriMo, and then I moved on from that. So I was forcing myself to do some really heavy lifting right away. And I'm like, and I've got a 4-year-old son.
Yeah.
So I had all the inspiration I needed from that. Pulled in a few other characters from other books, like Joven is very heavily based on Burrich from or my memory of Burrich when I read Robin Hobb as a 19-year-old. I read it again since then. I was like, well, one, okay, that is what I picture, but also it's different when you're reading it as a 40-year-old and a 19-year-old. Birch is a very different character, but he's not. And so Joven came from that, and from Dernick in Bulgaria, and just all those different mentor figures. But I needed one that was going to actually not be secondary
Hmm.
for the first time, instead of taking everybody else's orders. He's like, no, I know what I'm doing. I'm the smith. I'm gonna fix it all, and if I don't, I'll just walk away.
Yeah.
I don't
I
care.
I saw it's when I read this, Andrew, and I mean, you can, I mean, I saw some Dostoevsky in this. I saw some Anton Chekhov in this. I saw some, obviously, some Witcher. Yeah,
Mhm.
I know. I know it
Yeah,
didn't inform you because you hadn't read it.
only a little bit of Cormac McCarthy, because
There's a
I
bit
could not
of
finish the road.
Yeah, there's a bit of that
Yeah,
loneliness on the road that was there.
yeah.
I also saw like some of like the unnamed man of Sergio Leone's films that Clint
Mhm,
Eastwood.
mhm.
I mean, any of these
Yeah,
iconic, larger than life protector figures that have a moral compass, that are stoic, and I mean, it's just so classic. I mean, everyone's going to bring an example of this and slot themselves right in.
yeah.
It's
And I
so
wanted to do
effective.
justice to that trope too, so that even if we've all had that man in our life,
Hopefully,
whether positive or negative.
yeah.
It could be a negative situation too. So I wanted to do justice to the trope, so that even if you had a bad experience with somebody like that as a mentor in your life, that it could be a bit of a sanctification to that.
Sure.
And because I mean that's it's part of writing realistic characters. Sometimes we're writing people we don't know, and
Right.
so we add different people we know and put them in the psyche, and then see what pans out. But you know, it's a kind of that quintessential. It's the silent man we hope was our mentor, if he wasn't
Yeah.
our mentor, and can that be captured in a way that's so realistic that it isn't a trope anymore, right?
Right.
Yeah,
And I think it was the Slavic roots of this, and I'm not extremely well versed or familiar. Some of the lore, and I don't want to give more than away than
mhm,
I've already said, of like fate being broke,
right, right.
did you lift this straight from Slavic, or was this a creation
No,
of
it's
your own that you kind of?
very creation of my own. It's inspired by Slavic. The Vodyanov. I can actually send you the picture I found from like an old Russian drawing of the
So
slime trope.
that,
So
yeah,
that is literally what they look like in I think it's Polish, but the Vodyanov is all over,
right.
because Slavic is a very broad term for, it could be anything from Crimea out to Hungary, all the way out to Georgia, all the way up to the Balkans. It's not, that's not Slavic, right? Then it's Baltic, but they all share a lot of the same philosophy in their mythology, and same monsters that you do not see even in Germany, which is very dark as well. Like
Hmm.
you look at Brothers Grimm had dark Germany, but Slavic is a very different, it's very very stoic. It's very like German mythology is about, well, here's why you shouldn't do bad things. The witch will eat you.
Yeah, the
And
kids will
and
pay.
yeah,
They were
and
bad.
yeah, and but Slavic has a much more marriage between the city and the country, of we
Mm.
respect that there's darkness out there, and if we're lucky it won't come in, but if we go out there we must respect it. So it almost has a Miyazaki feeling in nature to that, if that you're going to go out there, it could probably will kill you. How
Hmm.
can you respect it? But and then and I did some definite left turns on certain things, like what animals were each of the gods represented by.
Hmm.
They aren't specifically the things that are even respected in Slavic. Even like bear is not a big. We think of the Slavic bear, right? The
Yeah.
Russian bear, but it's usually the fox, the rabbit, and I think the eagle are the three main animals. We're also working with a lot of lost lore, because
Mm.
there was so much of it destroyed over the Middle Ages compared to what was kept over the course of 2000 years in Western Europe. There's so much destroyed, so we're kind of pulling out a little bit. In the same way, like when you look at the Greek gods, we only have whatever Homer told us.
Right.
and a
Yeah.
few other things besides that. But we know, that's not all of it.
Oh, no,
And so, yeah,
we've
exactly.
lost so
And but
much.
even that is a good rich,
Yeah.
nugget you can work with or build from, because it's so,
But isn't our
archetypical.
and I mean this is another tangent, but isn't our own times is such a great illustration of that because you know we're so keyed into what we want to believe. We may not be getting every bit of the story, and then we're going forward
Right.
with what we've got, that what we feel comfy with, and then we're passing that on. I mean, I can see in our lives now things getting left behind.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And then it makes you wonder, like, we're starting to see other mythologies that have an even richer past, like East India is just starting to enter the scene,
Mm,
and their fantasy is going to start showing up over in the West, and it's going to be just totally
yeah,
new, and it's massively rich because it has a full 3,000 years of unadulterated history, because they've been able to keep so much of it intact.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating how the world is changing the
Mhm.
genre.
Yeah.
African myth and
Yep.
Indian myth, and
Yep.
it's all now starting to come out. And I think some of the
And
indie scene helped that because it opened
absolutely.
the floodgates because
Yep.
people are starting to see the success that indie is having of pushing a vanguard and not
Yep.
just doing what's always been done. You know.
Right. There's always a bit of a retraining too. Like you and I can look back and go, we we grew up seeing first anime and Japanese culture start to come over, and then especially probably more as a threshold point, but like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and Hero, and all of the Chinese cinema that was happening there, we were already watching other movies coming out of China, but because of that training in our youth, we can then tell stories using that framework from the Chinese storytelling or from the anime and Japanese storytelling that we couldn't before.
Yeah.
And then now we're seeing like African sci-fi happening, not just from Black Widow, but from other things too. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
starting
Yeah.
to create new ways of telling stories, and now we're going to get India coming in, and who knows what's next after that,
And like your own personal journey, I don't
right?
discount games such as Warhammer or
Hmm.
video games, which Japanese or Chinese have a huge influence on the
Yeah,
storytelling mechanics. You know,
yeah,
so it's our generation of storytellers is very interesting. It's far more global, I think, than
yeah.
some of the past storytellers.
Yeah, because we're not just stuck to what our professors told us we have to tell.
Right.
Here's what the hero's journey is. It's like, well, that's one of 20 different ways we could tell a story. And like you say, game fiction, like if you've never played Banner Saga, uh,
Mm-mm.
it is an incredible story. And what did they use to tell their story? Oregon Trail. It's an
Mm.
Oregon Trail story that takes place in a in a Ragnarok Viking type setting that's just the most beautiful art and music you'll ever hear, and it's just immersive. But they're taking a storytelling thing from Oregon Trail,
Oregon
and
Trail.
it's and nobody would have allowed that to fly
No, no,
20 years 30 years ago.
absolutely not. Before I lose you, Andrew, how about now? I've heard you say book three. Are we looking at a trilogy here? Are we looking at 4 books? Or are you sure?
Uh, I I know how many it's going to be, and we'll see how the third book pans out.
Okay.
It
S-
will be no more than four.
Okay. So third
But
book
that will
is
not be the last story in the in Balatar. But Joven and Leaf's story is I'm going to be done with it in the next 6 months. I'll have finished writing it.
okay.
Yeah.
So the end of the story will be out in 2024. You feel
Yes.
okay.
Yes.
And now, and I haven't touched your more epic fantasy.
Yep.
Is that a completely different world? Is there any
Very.
crossover? Okay,
No.
completely different.
Yeah, and someone asked me a while ago, could you put Balatar in the same world? And I thought about it for a while. Like, it doesn't work. It doesn't work cosmologic, cosmologically.
Okay.
It does not work with the cosmology. So it's in a totally different world, and it's the big epic that who knows when it's going to end. I'm telling it. I'm telling it in groups of stories. Like the 3 books that are out right now are Deathless Beast
Right.
and
Now these look
Bone
like
Shroud.
chunkers, man. These are
Yep.
definitely heftier than thrice here.
Yeah, so Thrice and Fourscored together are the size of one of these.
Okay.
And then Gloves of Eons came out.
This past year.
Yep, that came out in September. And then I just finished the draft of book 4, which is Dread Knight. And that'll be the end of the first arc of 2 arcs for an 8-book series. But there will be other
There'll
series
be
and
other stories to
trilogies,
tell.
and there's at least 1, if not 2, sequel 8-book series that will finish the whole arc that I've got that I'm working on. All the other stories are just inserting points of view into the grand scheme of things. But we'll get there.
So are you one of these people that have everything up here, or is it or massive notes somewhere?
I used to have it all up here, and I learned how stupid I was for doing that. Because I was nothing was allowed to grow. I didn't.
Yeah.
I was thinking way too highly of myself, and I just know it all up here. And once I started writing it down, they talk about the world building iceberg, and my iceberg was hollow, so it was all topical, and I didn't actually know what was going on. Once I wrote it down, I realized I had to do a whole bunch of renaming and redesigning, and so I write down as absolute much as I can. And I still don't know everything because what you've written down starts informing things. So like I had no magic system, and I figured I'll design a magic system in book 9 and then introduce magic at that point. That'll work, right? And then I realized that there is a magic system and it's always been there. I just hadn't realized how many rules there were. So it's not a Sandersonian magic system, but it's not a rando Gandalf.
Yeah,
But
there's
it
just
kind of
magic
is.
because there is. Yeah.
Right. So I definitely write down as absolutely much as I can, so that I can, or I write a thing I need to design so that I can come back to it later. How does this country's economy work? I don't know. I don't care, but I know it's partnered next to these two, and they have these 2 industries. So when we get to it, I can design that then and figure out what's important about them. So yeah, I try to write down as much as I can, or at least a note that tells me to do it later.
Yeah, gotcha. So now I'm going to come all the way back to where your eyes lit up talking about Warhammer. Someday science fiction. Are these 2 series your babies right now, or do you have other ideas in the back of your head that are
I
gonna come
don't
someday?
I have one science fiction idea, but it keeps getting pushed down as to maybe. So it's not super important. I've got 2 other big ideas I am very actively working on.
Okay.
One of which will take me a couple of years to actually plan it out, because it's too timey-wimey for me to execute without having the whole series outlined from the beginning, because I'm going to tell the whole story backwards.
Oh, wow.
Like each book, like the first book will take place in one era, and then I'll jump back 100 years to the next one. But I want to make it so that so I can test it on a beta and say, read the whole thing forward though, and read it from the last book to the front. I don't know. And and it could be that this is just my mental gymnastics, and it's just, and that idea is just there to inspire me, and it will never amount to anything. But the story will happen, and it's slowly being developed.
What
And
genre is that, if you can say?
Sandalpunk. So Sandalpunk will be like Ben-Hur. So it's going to be like pre AD era, and then backwards from there. But it will be a fantasy setting. I almost thought about placing it in Balatar, but I'm probably scrapping that idea. I don't want to get too egotistical on that. But and then I am working on another story that I will write the first book at the end of this year, and that'll be an Age of Skysail trilogy. So I'm pitching it as Pirates of the Caribbean meets The Mummy.
Nice.
Yeah.
Full adventure.
Full adventure, sky sail in a world that has no oceans, just trees.
Yeah. I like that. I like that.
Yeah.
Well, Andrew, I want to thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
I absolutely want to curse you because I have to go buy a lot of more books right now. Because I've got Foursquare, but I mean, I've got to pick up these other 3 that are already out, because that just sounds too good. I'm going to have to get into that series as well. So thank you so much for joining us, Andrew. I can't wait to see what comes next. I can't wait to pick up Fourscored and see where this story goes to.
Thank you.
And just thank you for your time and your work. I really appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You got it.